Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. It started out like any other quiet evening at home, the kind of night that was supposed to be ordinary, simple, and safe. The living room was warm with the soft glow of the lamp, a bowl of popcorn resting on the table, and a movie playing on the screen. I never imagined that something so casual, something as innocent as a movie night, could lead to a moment that would change everything. But sometimes, life has a way of surprising us, pulling us into situations where emotions blur the lines we swore we would never cross. I had always thought of myself as someone in control, practical, steady, and responsible. But that night, I felt something shift. Sitting beside him, I noticed things I had never paid attention to before. Maybe it was the way he laughed at the screen, maybe it was the closeness in the silence that followed when the movie ended, or maybe it was just the feeling of being seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Whatever it was, it caught me off guard. And once I noticed it, I couldn't ignore it. The movie was just background noise compared to the thoughts swirling in my head. Every glance, every small exchange between us seemed to carry a weight that hadn't been there before. I told myself it was just the comfort of companionship, just two people sharing a late-night moment. But deep down, I knew it was something more. Something I wasn't supposed to feel. He was kind, attentive, and far more grown than I sometimes allowed myself to realize. At 23, he wasn't a boy anymore. He carried himself with confidence, yet still had a softness that made me want to lean closer. That realization unsettled me. It made me question myself: why now? Why him? Why was I suddenly aware of every detail, every subtle movement, as though my heart and mind were working against me? As the night went on, the silence between us became louder than the dialogue of the film. It was in that quiet where everything seemed to hang in the air, unspoken feelings, unacknowledged tension, and a dangerous pull I didn't want to admit to myself. I should have stood up, excused myself, and ended the night with nothing more than a casual goodbye. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed. I let the moment linger, and that was the first choice that would lead me down a path I never expected to take. Sometimes, we don't realize we're crossing a line until we're already on the other side of it. That's where this story begins, on the edge of something I never thought I would do, caught between what I knew was right and what I felt in that moment. The credits of the movie rolled across the screen, but neither of us moved to turn it off. The popcorn bowl sat half empty between us, forgotten, while the room was wrapped in an unusual stillness. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the faint sound of cars passing outside, but inside the living room it felt like the world had narrowed down to just the two of us. I glanced at him, trying to catch his expression without making it too obvious. He seemed relaxed, stretched back into the couch, his eyes still fixed on the television even though the movie was already over. I told myself that it was nothing, just an ordinary night. Yet the quiet closeness made it hard to think straight. I had known him for years, but never like this. The difference now was undeniable. He wasn't the teenager I used to scold for leaving dirty dishes in the sink. He was a man, grown and steady, with his own way of looking at the world. That thought alone stirred something unsettling inside me, something I didn't want to acknowledge, but couldn't push away. I shifted in my seat, pretending to adjust the blanket I had draped over my lap, though really it was just an excuse to do something with my hands. He turned his head slightly, our eyes meeting for just a second longer than necessary. It was one of those moments that carried no words, but somehow spoke volumes. My heart picked up its pace, and I quickly looked away, hoping he hadn't noticed. To break the tension, I asked him what he thought of the movie. He smiled, an easy, genuine smile that made the air feel even heavier. His voice was casual when he answered, but there was a warmth behind it, as though he was speaking more to me than about the film. I laughed softly at his reply, though I couldn't even remember what he said a moment later. I was too busy trying to steady my breathing, too busy telling myself that it was just harmless conversation. Still, the more we talked, the more the room seemed to shrink around us. Time felt slower, the night stretching out in a way that made me forget how late it had become. At one point, he leaned forward to grab his drink, and the faint brush of his arm against mine sent a rush through me I didn't expect. It wasn't intentional, At least that's what I told myself, but the spark it left behind was undeniable. I reminded myself of all the reasons I should keep my thoughts in check, all the reasons why this was dangerous ground. But as much as I tried to focus on those reasons, another part of me wondered what it would mean if I didn't. That was the conflict I found myself stuck in, logic pulling me one way, emotions tugging me in another. He noticed I had gone quiet, and with a slight tilt of his head, he asked if I was okay. The concern in his voice only made it harder to hide what I was feeling. I forced a smile, nodding quickly, but inside my chest was a storm of confusion and curiosity. That night, something unspoken passed between us. Not an action, not even words, but a silent understanding that neither of us dared to acknowledge out loud. It left me wondering if he felt it too, or if it was just my own imagination running wild. I didn't know it then, but this was only the beginning of a slow unraveling of long nights, quiet glances, and choices that would test every boundary I thought I had. The memory of that first movie night stayed with me long after, replaying in my mind, tempting me with possibilities I knew I shouldn't entertain. The following days felt ordinary on the surface, but underneath there was something different I couldn't ignore. Every time we crossed paths in the house, I found myself hyper-aware of the smallest things: his footsteps in the hallway, the way he leaned against the kitchen counter with a quiet confidence, the calm tone in his voice when he asked simple questions. They were ordinary gestures, things I had seen 100 times before, but now they carried a weight that unsettled me. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe that movie night had simply magnified feelings of loneliness I had been carrying for a while. But then, there would be a moment, his hand brushing against mine when we both reached for the same dish, or the way his eyes lingered just a second longer than usual, and suddenly I wasn't so sure. The conflict became harder to ignore. Part of me wanted to step back, to put walls between us before those small sparks turned into something dangerous. Yet another part of me felt drawn in, curious about whether he was feeling the same pull. It was a dangerous dance, one where every step forward risked something, but every step back felt almost impossible. One evening, I found him in the living room again, this time flipping through channels absent-mindedly. The couch seemed smaller than before, as though it wanted to force us closer. I sat down on the other end, pretending to be casual, but even that distance felt charged. He looked at me with that same quiet attention, as though waiting for me to speak first. We ended up talking about nothing in particular: work, errands, little things that should have filled the silence. But underneath every word was something else, something we weren't admitting. At one point, he laughed at a story I told, a genuine laugh that softened his whole face. That laugh made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in a long time, and it left me wondering if I had been searching for that kind of connection without even realizing it. As the days turned into weeks, the unspoken tension grew. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about me too. About what I wanted, what I was missing, and what I was afraid to confront. The movie night had planted a seed, and now it was quietly taking root, no matter how much I tried to deny it. There were moments I caught myself overanalyzing every detail, questioning if I was imagining things. Did his voice soften only when he spoke to me, or was that just who he was? Did he sit a little closer than necessary, or was I reading too much into it? That uncertainty was both torturous and thrilling, and it kept me on edge, never quite sure where the next moment would take us. One late afternoon, we ended up in the kitchen together, preparing dinner side by side. The closeness was unavoidable in the small space. When he reached above me to grab a spice from the shelf, I froze, suddenly aware of how near he was. My heart raced, though nothing happened, not even a word. But it was in those silences that the conflict screamed the loudest. I knew the line was still there, clear as ever, but each day it felt thinner, easier to cross. The real battle was happening inside me, between what was right and what I was starting to crave. And as much as I tried to distract myself with chores, routines, and responsibilities, the thought of him always crept back in. Maybe that's what makes stories like this so dangerous. They don't unfold with big, dramatic gestures, but with small, everyday moments that slowly turn into something bigger. The tension had become impossible to ignore. What started as fleeting moments and uncertain glances had grown into something that filled the air between us every time we were in the same room. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that one small step could change everything, but not knowing if the ground beneath us was strong enough to hold. Nights felt the heaviest. The quiet of the house only made the silence louder, pressing down with questions I didn't have answers to. Sometimes I would pass his door on the way to my room and pause, wondering if he was awake, if he was lying there thinking the same thoughts that kept me restless. It was in those moments I realized how close I was to crossing into something I couldn't undo. One evening, it all seemed to reach its peak. The rain had been falling steadily outside, soft against the windows, creating the kind of atmosphere that made everything feel more intimate, more fragile. We ended up in the living room again, just the two of us. No movie this time, just conversation. At first, it was easy, light-hearted talk that felt safe. But then, the pauses grew longer, the words fewer, and suddenly the weight of everything we hadn't said before pressed in on us. He looked at me with that quiet intensity one had noticed before, his eyes holding mine a little too long. I felt my breath catch, not because of what he did, but because of what I felt in response. I tried to break the moment with a smile, but it faltered, betraying me. My hands fidgeted in my lap as I searched for the right thing to say, the thing that would dissolve the tension without leaving questions hanging in the air. But instead of speaking, the silence deepened. The world outside seemed to disappear, the rain, the ticking clock, everything faded until it felt like only the two of us existed in that room. My heart pounded as I realized how close we were, not just physically but emotionally, balanced on the edge of something we both knew could change everything. For a split second, I thought he might say something, that he might break the silence first. His lips parted, his posture shifted, and the air between us seemed to tighten with unspoken meaning. I braced myself, caught between fear and anticipation, not sure which I wanted more. That moment stretched endlessly, every second pulling me deeper into uncertainty. Would this be the night when everything we had been holding back finally came crashing forward? Or would one of us step away, leaving the tension to linger even longer? I didn't know. And maybe that was what made it so powerful, the not knowing, the possibility that at any moment, everything could tip one way or the other. The silence of that night stayed with me long after, haunting me in ways I couldn't explain. I kept replaying every detail, the look in his eyes, the way the air seemed heavy with words we didn't dare to say, the closeness that felt impossible to deny. But just when I thought the tension between us had reached its limit, something happened that made everything more complicated. The next weekend, I came home earlier than expected. I stepped inside, the sound of laughter drifting from the living room. For a moment, I thought nothing of it, until I turned the corner and saw him there, not alone, but with someone else. A young woman about his age, smiling, leaning close, their voices low and easy in a way that struck a chord in me. My heart sank, though I had no right to feel the sharp sting of jealousy that rose in my chest. I told myself it was normal, that of course he would have his own life, his own connections. But as I watched them from a distance before making my presence known, I realized how far I had already fallen into something I shouldn't have. Because it hurt. It hurt more than I could admit. When I walked in, he introduced her casually as a friend. I smiled politely, pretending the knot in my stomach didn't exist. She was warm, friendly, and clearly comfortable around him. The way she looked at him made my chest tighten even more. I forced myself to join their small talk, though inside, all I could think about was the night we shared in silence, the moment that had felt like it belonged only to us. After she left, I tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, but the air between us was different. I caught him watching me, as though he knew I had noticed something. For the first time, I wasn't sure what he was thinking. Was the tension I felt one-sided all along? Or was he testing me, waiting to see how I would react? That night, when I finally lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind was spinning with questions I didn't want to face. If he had someone else, why did it feel like there was still something unspoken between us? And if there was, what did that say about both of us? The conflict I had been wrestling with before now grew even sharper, fueled by doubt and the fear of losing something that had never really been mine to begin with. The days that followed were filled with subtle shifts. He was still kind, still attentive, but there was a new layer in his eyes whenever we crossed paths, like a secret he wasn't ready to share. At times, I thought he was about to bring it up, to explain what that moment in the living room really meant. But he never did. Instead, he left me dangling in uncertainty, my emotions swinging between hope and restraint. The second twist in this story wasn't just that he might have someone else, it was that I realized how deeply I cared. The jealousy, the confusion, the restless nights, it all revealed a truth I had been too afraid to name. And with that truth came a bigger risk. Because if I wasn't careful, I could lose everything: my stability, my peace, and the thin line I had been struggling so hard not to cross. So here I was, trapped in a web of emotions that only grew tighter with each passing day. A part of me wanted to confront him, to demand clarity, to finally put an end to the questions that burned inside me. But another part knew that once those words were spoken, there would be no turning back. And that is where the stakes became higher than ever. Because now, it wasn't just about resisting temptation, it was about facing the possibility that he had already moved on, while I was still standing on the edge of something I could no longer deny. The tension had built to the point where silence was no longer enough. I couldn't carry the weight of unanswered questions any longer, and one evening, when the house was quiet and the air felt thick with all the things we hadn't said, I finally spoke. My voice trembled as I asked about her, the young woman I had seen with him, the one who had left me wondering where I stood. For a moment, he just stared at me, as if measuring how honest he should be. Then he shook his head and gave a small laugh, not mocking, but almost relieved. "She's just a friend," he said softly, his eyes steady on mine. "Nothing more. But I wondered if you thought otherwise." Those words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just his answer, it was the way he looked at me when he said it. There was no judgment, no defensiveness, only quiet truth. And in that look, I realized that he had felt it too all along. The silence between us had never been one-sided. My heart raced as the reality settled in. Everything I had tried to suppress, everything I had convinced myself was only in my head, had been mirrored in him. For a moment, the room seemed to close in, every sound falling away until there was only the two of us and the fragile thread that had been stretched to its breaking point. "I can't stop thinking about that night," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. It was the truth, raw and unfiltered, and once it was spoken, there was no taking it back. His expression softened, and he leaned forward, closing the space between us with a quiet intensity that made my chest tighten. "Neither can I," he replied. The words hung in the air, heavier than anything we had ever said before. That was the moment, the climax of everything we had been dancing around. The invisible line we had guarded so carefully dissolved, and in its place was the undeniable truth of what we both felt. It was overwhelming, frightening, and yet strangely freeing, as though we had been holding our breath for too long and finally let it out. But just when I thought the story had reached its resolution, a twist came that I never expected. He hesitated, his eyes clouding with something deeper. "There's something you don't know," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you before, but now I can't keep it to myself." The words sent a chill through me. After everything, after finally breaking the silence, another layer of truth was waiting, something that could either pull us closer or unravel everything we had just admitted. And that was where the night ended, not with closure, but with a new secret hanging in the air, a secret that promised to change everything all over again. His words hung in the air. "There's something you don't know." My heart pounded as I waited, torn between wanting to know and fearing what the truth might be. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair as though searching for the right way to say it. Finally, he looked at me with an honesty that left no room for doubt. "I didn't want to push, because I wasn't sure if you felt it too," he admitted. "That night, I thought maybe I imagined it. But when I saw the way you looked at me, I knew. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to ruin what we already had." The tension that had been building for weeks finally broke. The mystery wasn't about someone else. It wasn't about secrets that could tear us apart. It was about fear. Fear of speaking the truth. Fear of crossing a line that neither of us thought possible. And yet here we were, both caught in the same storm of emotions. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I had been holding. You weren't imagining it, I said softly. I felt it too. I just didn't know how to admit it. The weight of unspoken words lifted, leaving us both with a clarity we had been avoiding. There was no more pretending, no more sidestepping the truth. The connection had been real all along, and now it was finally acknowledged. But with that acknowledgement came responsibility. We both knew we couldn't go back to how things were before. The line we had crossed wasn't something we could erase, it was something we had to face together. The late nights, the stolen glances, the doubts, they had all led us here. And though it was risky, though it was complicated, it was also honest. In the days that followed, the house felt different. Lighter, freer. We didn't need to hide behind silence anymore, and that change brought a strange sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, and the world outside still had its judgments, but within our walls, there was a truth we could no longer deny. Looking back, I realized the lesson wasn't about the line we crossed, but about the importance of honesty, with ourselves and with each other. Silence had only fed the uncertainty, while honesty brought clarity, even if it scared us. Sometimes the most unexpected connections are the ones that teach us the most about who we are and what we truly want. And though this story may not be simple, it is real, and it will always remind me that life often leads us down paths we never thought we'd take. So, what do you think? Was crossing that line worth it, or should it have stayed unspoken? Would you like to see a sequel exploring what happened after this ending? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to share your thoughts on the choices made along the way. Summary: this story follows an unexpected journey of romance, temptation, and emotional conflict that begins with an innocent movie night. What starts as small moments of connection grows into undeniable tension, leading to a powerful climax where truth and vulnerability change everything. Filled with suspense, emotion, and reflection, this story explores the complexity of relationships, boundaries, and the courage it takes to admit what's in your heart.